Hello, this is John Spink, Director of the Food Fraud Initiative at Michigan State University and an Assistant Professor in the College of Veterinary Medicine. This is my presentation, Food Fraud, A Global Perspective, at the 12th International Dubai Food Safety Conference. It's here in Dubai, Tuesday, October 30th, 2018. Just to give you an overview, a lot of our information, all of our information is on our website, foodfraud.msu.edu. Please feel free to look there. Also, our contact information is offered throughout this slide, so feel free to contact us at any time. First off, we'd like to thank some of our major colleagues, partners, our food fraud think tank. So this really supports our interdisciplinary approach. And these are industry members of Mars, Danone, Cargill, Wegmans, Mondelez, Hershey's, and Woolworths. And what they do is they really help us to continue to support the Food Fraud Initiative mission to standardize prevention practices, help to lead policy and strategy. We don't do any testing, we don't have databases, we don't have lab equipment, we just focus only on strategy and policy. This is a great way to demonstrate external and internal leadership, meaning that this is a statement that these companies take this seriously in the marketplace and they're looking for innovation. It also is a statement internally that they're engaging with academia and thought leaders to really move the product forward and protect their products and their customers. Our deliverables have expanded over time, and one is the ability to go to places like Codex, ISO, others, to be involved in those standard-setting activities where there's not usually funding for outside people. Also to develop these open, free courses, and we've got videos online, like this is being recorded, but also we have our MOOCs, our Massive Open Online Courses. So the Food Fraud Audit Guide and the Food Defense Audit Guide directly came from direction from the think tank. And we've expanded a lot of those online resources. We also have more in-depth reports, such as many reports on the specific final rules of the Food Safety Modernization Act and others. And we're starting to do more industry benchmarking surveys. So first off, to thank that group. Second is, what do we do? So we're academics. We teach. That's the core of what we do. It's the core of academia. And you'll see that outreach, research, and education cycle. So me being at this conference in Dubai is outreach. And I've already learned a lot. From the first hour I landed here with conversations with the people, I learned a lot. And that then brings up some research questions, which even this week we've researched them in more detail. And some of those adjustments have gone into this even slide deck in the matter of the last couple days. So we go back and look at it, and it goes into that research, goes into academic journals, publications, peer review process, and then we can use that back in our education. So that's graduate courses specifically and more other courses like that, which then feeds back into outreach. As I mentioned before, our first type of main program is MOOCs, free open online courses. They're open to anyone. There's an optional certificate of completion if you need that as an auditor or so to demonstrate some competence or expertise. The format is typically a monthly MOOC. They're all offered monthly with 2 webinars. They're also available on demand, so you could actually binge watch all of them at one time. But we've got 4 of them right now, and the first one's a broad overview, goes into details on broad topics, and then we have a food fraud audit guide. So that's specifically people that are getting audited or people that are doing the auditing. That could be a second party or internal auditor. That many times are basically accounting backgrounds to look at that type of standards process. So that's teaching them a bit about food fraud. And also, if you're a third party or external auditor, this really is just a basic overview for that role. And then with a lot of new requirements like the food safety or like the Global Food Safety Initiative, food defense is also new, and it's a different type of intentional act. So we've been asked to develop a food defense audit guide as well. So we have that for a MOOC. And then we've just recently developed a food fraud VASIP, a vulnerability assessment plan and food fraud prevention strategy development. This doesn't walk you through the process of doing a vulnerability assessment, but it really presents the overview and the basic methods for that, and then really getting to the point of implementing a program itself. As I said, these are all free, offered at any time, and feel free to share the links and information with anybody. Next are executive education or short courses. So we conduct these usually at Michigan State, but sometimes around the country or around the world. These are more in-depth, sometimes focused on specific industries or specific customers. So to look at a definition and scope, so earlier this week, it's Tuesday, on Sunday was a pre-conference workshop looking at global understanding of food fraud. And in that conference was a set of definitions of food fraud the types of fraud products and what is technically industry, or for the scope of that. So we'll build off that. First, food fraud is illegal deception for economic gain using food. And I've highlighted different words in different colors to point this out. The first is illegal. So something can be, you can believe it's a deceptive practice, that second word, but really our focus is on illegal. That is a violation of some law or regulation specifically. So that's the first step that we do, is look at what law has been violated and the details of that. The next is deception. So someone is trying to get away with something. And as we point out, sometimes deception isn't illegal, but in this case we're looking for that deception. For economic gain, the reason why we focus on economic gain and not public health threat or other things like that is that we're looking at the motivation or the root cause. And the bad guy is not trying to harm someone. They're trying to get away with cheating you. They may not be intelligent about allergens or other types of public health risks, or they're accidentally maybe a public health risk, but their goal is economic gain. So if we want to prevent it, we need to focus on that part of the motivation. And finally, using food. If it wasn't using food, it would be a material good, it would be broad product fraud prevention. That is an area of study under ISO and other areas, but for us we focus in on food. The types of food fraud. Now, this is really important because traditionally a lot of the food fraud programs and the problems developed out of a food safety approach or public health-based approach, which is really looking internally and looking at incoming goods. So a lot of times the programs are managed by something like a supplier quality assurance group or incoming goods quality control. But for food fraud, the enterprise, the corporation, and the enterprise could be a company or a country, an entire country. You're worried about all types of fraud, not just this adulterant substance piece, because these others can cause just as many problems, such as tampering, misbranding, mislabeling, gray market production, theft, diversion, or counterfeiting itself. So it's really important to step back and make sure to cover and address the broad, all types of food fraud. Next are products themselves. So again, a lot of times there's a focus on that product coming in. It could be customs, could be others. Other people could be quality assurance again. But if you're looking at the entire product, your entire company, then you need to look at the entire supply chain. That's raw materials or incoming goods, because an incoming good could be a finished material that's not a raw material anymore. Goods in manufacturing, because there can be fraud that occurs within your facilities. Goods in storage, products at retailers, all the way through to destruction, because a package could be refilled. And so there could be problems there as well. A key is if there's a problem at any place in the supply chain and that product, even if it's a counterfeit, has your name on it, it's your problem. And that's a real key for the entire enterprise. Next is we had a focus in the conference on needs of industry. So it's really important to step back and define what parts of industry are we looking at. And there's a couple different types of industry, or if we say industry is people with commerce, there's a couple different aspects here. One are the producers, manufacturers, food distributors, and retailers. These would be the food companies, the food brand owners there. And then we've got us types of academics and other strategy researchers. We don't technically have a product, it's more of a service. And there's an entire group, really important group, that's very engaged in this process is the technology suppliers. And that includes authenticity affirmation. That's looking to prove something's genuine or fake, I guess. So that could be testing the product itself, could be analyzing the transaction and looking at that along the way. It could be also an external component. That could be something like an authentication feature, such as a hologram or other types of coding. Data management, that's monitoring product through the supply chain. Investigations, very important. If you have suspicious activity or an incident, you need to investigate it to find the bad guys, and also, more importantly, is to figure out how they perceived fraud opportunity to breach the system. That's the investigation piece. Audits. So this is looking at suppliers and others to make sure that they are implementing good manufacturing practices and others. And then market monitoring. This is general perspective, looking across the marketplace, around the world, looking everywhere and anywhere for product, just to see if information comes up. So a key here when we're looking at the food fraud, to broaden it, to look specifically at the types, look at the products, and then define industry itself. Now, when we look at food fraud, we look at all food risks first. We need to look at food fraud in relation to the other food risks to understand what we're doing or what we're not doing. And when we, early on in the process, we saw food safety and food defense were really well known, kind of unintentional and intentional. That was kind of where it went. But we found that when we were looking at prevention, looking at the motivation, we really had to split it out, had to split food fraud out and really food quality out. Because, again, we're trying to understand why things occur, the motivation. If someone's got a food quality problem, they accidentally have their scales not calibrated right, then just a quick email, voicemail, text would get them to respond. They're not trying to create that act. Now, they may get an economic gain because of that, but that would be an accidental or unintentional gain, where the fraudsters are actively seeking to avoid detection. They actively seek to circumvent the systems we have in place to catch them or to prevent them. So the column on the left is unintentional. You don't create those acts. The column on the right is intentional. The bad guys know what they're doing, and they have an intent to act. For food defense, the goal is harm. It's public health, economic, or terror. Now, a public health agency would focus on the public health aspects. A more of an economic or crime agency would focus on other areas such as the economic or terror impact. For food fraud, the motivation is economic gain for themselves. And that's a real key, that they're trying to find a way to make money. They're essentially a business. Now, a criminal enterprise in many cases, but that's something that we can understand. We try to put things in place that reduce their ability to make money. Now, also before moving on, we'll look at the science and sciences of food fraud prevention. And this has been interesting as an evolution as we're looking at the root causes and also many of the stakeholders in the marketplace. So kind of up the middle there is food safety, because that food safety and food authenticity, food science, that started with detecting the product. And then we went to the other side to look at criminology, because we've got the bad guys themselves. The root cause is a human adversary, and there's a extensive research area in and around all types of situational crime prevention, routine activities theory, and other ways of studying the criminal. Then we've got standards and certification, as well as public policy, laws and regulations. It's looking at how there is governance in the marketplace to see how there's shared information, transactions, and common practices. And at the top here, we have enterprise risk management. And this is really decision sciences and looking at businesses of how they judge, how they make a decision of how much is enough. A food business and a food product is not zero risk. We try to make it low risk, and we try to make it a risk within our risk tolerance. But definitely food is not low risk. And then we look at a lot of different types of disciplines. And one thing we'll look at just briefly to speak about is from criminology. On the left side there is intelligence analysis. And people a lot of times when we're dealing with food fraud talk about intelligence, and they don't really realize that intelligence analysis is an official field of study. You can get a master's degree and a PhD in intelligence analysis. They have their own set of processes and procedures and best practices, and we can leverage that. So really important to look at intelligence analysis when we're looking at incidents and consider that. And something that may really pop out if you think about it is journalism. Why would journalism be in our suite of these sciences? Well, we see along the way that sometimes that media is reporting on food fraud incidents, and sometimes they're not educated on the way that we authenticate or certify our products. So we found that there was a problem in the marketplace because of responses. So we engaged our Department of Journalism at Michigan State as co-authors on some articles and some methods to do investigation, because they're connected into that field. They are experts, well known in that field of journalism. So investigative reporters and science reporters will see them as credible sources, and also then we can go to their associations and bring up this type of information. So we're looking at all the root causes of potential problems. Next is to look at what's going on really in the marketplace. And I think it's important at this conference specifically to look at the role of governments and regulation in food fraud prevention. So we started out that there were the regulations, and there's a lot of regulations, and then there was a lot of discussion about how to get those implemented. What we see as a best practice is governments require a process, such as the Food Safety Modernization Act or the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act requires a hazard analysis be documented regardless of the outcome. That means you can't just say, we're not going to worry about that product because we don't think it's bad or won't be a hazard. You have to show a hazard analysis. And that's a really key first point. And it's a very efficient end point in a lot of cases for government, just to require a process. Make sure to confirm that you expect a hazard analysis for all types of hazards. And that would include intentional acts for economic gain. And that's specifically what's mentioned in the Food Safety Modernization Act. So that's a best practice we recommend, to not prescribe exactly what to do, because what we see is if governments require a process, it does strengthen the regulations, because behind it in place are industry actions that are already underway. And so a key with that is we've got best practices, and we can then have governments just to know that these are being developed and being refined. Academics are involved, and what we see here is an example of the Global Food Safety Initiative. If you're not familiar with them, is originally a group of companies created the Global Food Safety Initiative to really look at a basic food safety management system that could be broadly implemented. And then when you have a harmonized standard system, then there can be this sharing of best practices and really sharing of knowledge across the marketplace. With GFSI, they create the idea. They're not a standard. They create what they call a benchmarking document. They state what they think should be in a standard. Next are the standard organizations themselves. So they do create the standards. And then a company, a manufacturer, would then decide which standard they'd be aligned to, and they would then seek certification, which would be a certification through third-party audits, someone coming in and judging them. And what you'll notice here now is a cycle, because at first governments were trying to strengthen the regulations and strengthen the protection of product in the marketplace. That really did push some people like GFSI and industry to work together to really increase the best practices, and also to allow sharing so that the product could become more efficiently safer along the way. Now, if that government on the right side requires a process, then that just strengthens the industry implementation of this, and there a cycle goes. And with the government, it's very efficient to start doing that. Next, to look at current industry needs and the focus on incidents, and then strategy and compliance as well. So first off, strategy and compliance. What's required under GFSI specifically? But this would also be this is not GFSI didn't get created in and of itself. It's based on ISO 22000, food safety management and food management, but that's also based on other ISO standards such as ISO 31000, which is risk management. And so there's a lot of different principles in there already that are really basic quality management principles. And the first is to do an assessment of everything. So that's a food fraud vulnerability assessment, enterprise-wide for all types of fraud and all products. That's the first requirement. The second requirement is a food fraud prevention strategy or mitigation plan. They're sometimes called similar things, same things. And that's, again, an enterprise-wide root cause analysis, but then also a decision-making process to manage and monitor the process, which is then into step 3, select, implement, and monitor the actions. This looks very familiar because if you're a criminologist, it's the SARA process. If you're quality management, it's Plan, Do, Check, Act. And that's really what it is. It's the application of a quality management system. What we've seen over time is there's 2 tracks of action. And we're now shifting, fortunately, from more the reactive tactical to more strategic and prevention. First off, if there's an incident, so say there's melamine in pet food, then pets are getting sick. We need to first figure out what's making pets sick, and then we need to detect it, and we need to deter it, which means testing specifically for melamine at certain levels, certain types of melamine in certain products. That's an incident review. So, and that's an incident track as things are starting for action. Really critical to do, but it's not prevention. It's preventing melamine, again, but not preventing all fraud. And there could, really we find that there's almost a near infinite amount of opportunities and variations of the types of fraud. So looking at it from the strategy and prevention approach, and really compliance is overall prevention. And that's what we see a shift. We see it evolving to here. And I'll go into more detail in the next slide. So the scope of the problem and how to approach the question. First off, we've got the whole idea of to detect it. We're finding it. We're catching it. And then ultimately we want to prevent it from even being considered as a fraud option. But we've got this challenge to detect everything everywhere. And how much is enough and how to decide, because you could just test for everything at the smallest levels, and really an entire marketplace could be priced out of the market. So what we see again is typically there was this focus on incident detection, but then it was really difficult to figure out how much is enough. We didn't have a real threshold. And if you start testing for melamine or horse meat or others and do it on a consistent basis, then the amount of product in the marketplace goes down. So there's probably not as much testing needed if there's less in the marketplace. It's really more preventative. But when we start from an incident perspective, that's really challenging and sometimes impossible to figure how much is enough. So we saw from strategy it needed a fundamentally different approach, to approach it from the opposite end. And the first is looking broadly at all opportunities, all the root causes, which is based on criminology, again, the human adversary. That's a very different approach and very different concept than looking at it from a contaminant testing approach. It's actually very different from law enforcement criminology, which is looking at an incident and chasing the specific types of bad guys or projects. So this is even a different type of criminology from the law enforcement side of it. And next is then the decision making, and that's really managerial accounting or enterprise risk management. And this also is public policy for the government side of it, to really look at where's this risk tolerance and how much is enough and how safe is safe. Once we apply the root cause analysis and look at the decision making, then we can look at actions. And then we can have a real decision making there. We can decide on those detection countermeasures going backwards, and then really reduce the even opportunity for incidents to occur. Finally, the way that we look at management and how the pieces all fit together is this food fraud prevention cycle. And again, as I said, it looks a lot like the Plan, Do, Check, Act, or SARA, Scanning, Analysis, Response, and Assessment models, because it is. It's really basic. There's not any new rocket science or new concepts here. It's really applying concepts, a wide range of concepts clearly to food fraud. What we've got is a food fraud prevention cycle. So it's always good to have a cycle. Things don't end. Things always connect back. Again, that's the Plan, Do, Check, Act, and others. At the top, we have the fraud opportunity to understand why and how this occurs. And the next is do some type of assessment on that fraud opportunity. And at this point, we're looking strategically. We're looking at the entire business. After that assessment, you also have to have some way to judge that risk against the risk tolerance of the certain organization. Again, it could be a marketplace, could be a company. Their unique fraud opportunity in relation to their unique risk tolerance. If you sell to babies, then that's different than selling to populations that aren't as immunocompromised, maybe. At that point, after considering that, we can look at countermeasures. This is ways to respond to the problem, how to try to reduce it, different things we can do with control measures as well. And then we also have new information that comes in. And then we have any new information, that then feeds back and changes the fraud opportunity. So we have this cycle. There at the top of the fraud opportunity is based on crime science. And right there you'll see the crime triangle. And that's a widely published and implemented theories. For assessments, you've got this initial screen, which is something very quick that could be subject matter expert insight only at the very beginning, all the way to a detailed assessment, which could be detailed databases or other types of testing that support that assessment as well. So there's an initial screen all the way to a detailed assessment. And then for information, we've got the different concepts. We've got incidents, known incidents that have occurred, where there's tests, there's really awareness, there's scanning. So this could be looking for something that's changing in the marketplace, such as pricing or just odd suppliers in and out. And public policy as well, because as the focus of an agency shifts, then there's more oversight of that marketplace. And so it's important to know what type of tests are going on and where that focus is. That's new information coming in. And then finally, countermeasures themselves. The first of the three is really traceability. So this is monitoring the product in the marketplace, where it is, how it's going, where it came from, where it's going. The second is investigation or audit. And we look at investigation or audit, these are human actions, human intelligence that we're gathering, really. Human is what they'll call it in the criminology intelligence analysis area, human intelligence. And this is looking at investigations themselves. And if we have an incident, it's really important to look at to find the bad guys in the product, but also to understand why and how they thought this was a fraud opportunity and how they did deceive us. And also that includes audit, which would be go to look at other companies, that either your suppliers or other types of service providers, to make sure that they're following good manufacturing practices that reduce the fraud opportunity as well. And then finally is testing. And this is authenticity testing of the product. It could be testing the product throughout the marketplace, such as traceability as well. It could be also an authentication feature, such as a hologram or other types of code on the product. So key here is what you'll see is a cycle, and so any question that comes up can be considered within that cycle. And now when we've got things like the VASIP process, we've got GFSI, and we've got the food fraud prevention cycle, we now can have companies talking together about sharing of best practices. If there's an investigation or an inspection from a government agency, they now have standardized processes to know kind of what to expect that's out there. And if they do see something like the food fraud prevention cycle, it's something that they do recognize. Finally, global trends. So food fraud prevention is an industry requirement as of January 2018. It's not optional. That's a real key. It's not an additional piece. It's not a separate type of standard. And that's something really, really progressive for the food industry compared to other industries. This is a part of the overall quality management food safety system and requirement. And really, we look at the foundation is the shift to an interdisciplinary approach. Now, as we mentioned before, too, that's looking at criminology for the root cause analysis, managerial accounting for how much is enough, also public policy for how much is enough. And then once we have that frame, then we can very efficiently move forward looking at food science and authenticity testing and into the detection realm of what we put forward. With that, I'll say thank you. We've got a lot of information on our website. Really look forward to communicating with you. There's our emails there, and now we'll open for discussion.